Hello there everybody, how's it going? I am of course the Timmeister and welcome back to the greater Timbukton region. In this episode guys, please bear with me as I have a bit of a cold, so forgive me if my voice sounds a little more raspy than usual, but it seems to be clearing up now, so by next episode I should be good to go. So for this episode guys, what we're going to be doing is of course finishing up the massive port of Timbukton by creating the naval base. So this naval base is going to be quite large. It's going to host a lot of warships and boats and different things, and it's also going to host a little bit of military stuff too. So it's going to serve as sort of a cargo port for military stuff such as like tanks and helicopters and anti-aircraft and whatever you may find in military bases. So it's going to be a pretty big project. And what's interesting with this is you typically don't see much military stuff in City Skylines, so even for me this is going to be a pretty interesting project. So again, with this entire port I was sort of basing everything off of the Halifax port, and again with the naval base I'm basing it off of the naval base in Halifax. Now I think the Halifax naval base is one of the largest, if not the largest, in Canada. So I mean it's still pretty big by Canadian standards, I guess. For US standards it might not be very big at all, but anyway. So yeah, that's basically what we're going to be doing in this episode. So what I'm doing now is I'm creating these little piers that are very narrow, and you know, I'm sort of basing this off of what I see on Google Maps, and it seems as in the Halifax port at least you have like these narrow piers and stuff that just serve as docks for, you know, ships. So there's not really any large like containers that are being offloaded and unloaded onto boats, so there's not really any big cranes and stuff like that in the naval base. So I just created these little piers just to sort of divide everything a little bit more, and you know, I think it looks pretty cool too. So that is basically what's going on in this episode. We're going to start by building the basic infrastructure around the naval base, and then we're going to move on to detailing the area a little bit more by the end of the episode. So although we pretty much complete the port in this episode, it won't still be 100% complete, as there will be still some details to be added on the exterior of the port. So there's going to be a sort of transition between the port and the inner city, whether it be, you know, some housing, residential, commercial buildings and stuff that are around the port. We'll have to get into that sort of transition a little later in the series. So for now, we're just going to focus on the actual port, and then get into, you know, everything around the port a little later in the series. So again, with this project, I quickly found out that I didn't really have nearly enough room for what I wanted to build. So again, I just had to terraform the area a little bit more to add a little bit of real estate. One thing that I tried to diversify a little bit on is I didn't want to make the port look too square and artificial. Because looking at various ports around the world, unless it's like a brand new artificial island port in Singapore or something like that, where, you know, obviously it's going to be very artificial looking, but a lot of older ports such as like St. John, New Brunswick, Halifax of course, and you know, even in like Portland or you know, places like that where they're very old cities, you'll typically find that their ports are sort of more lopsided and non-symmetrical, and you know, if you look closely you'll see that all the piers and stuff are a little smaller and everything is sort of a jumbled mess, so to speak. So this is sort of something that I tried to incorporate into Timbukton and not make the port, you know, just a giant square, and I didn't want to make it look super organized. I wanted to make it look like it's been there forever, and the city was sort of built off of it. It was expanded multiple times across, you know, years and years. So I think this naval port here demonstrates that pretty good, as when I zoom out here you'll see just how sort of different it is compared to the rest of the port. So of course when creating these large scale projects you want everything to be level everything to be sort of at the same height. So it requires some pretty tedious work and some precise movement of segments and all that kind of stuff. So it can be quite time consuming to create big projects like these. And of course these ships here, I found them all on the workshop, and they took quite a bit of digging. I found this nice pack here of all different kind of military stuff, and I think that they fit pretty nicely here. The only thing I don't really like about them is they don't really seem to like water very much. I think that they were set to be plopped on land, because as soon as I plop them in the water, no matter how shallow the water is, they always have like that little flooding icon on top. So I mean, that's kind of too bad. I found another ship pack that was pretty good, and the ships actually float about. But what I didn't like about that pack is in the game, the waves are pretty huge and dramatic, and you would just see the boats bobbing around like crazy in the water. So like, these big battleships, and they were just being tossed around like little toys. So I sort of made a compromise, and I plopped down these ships in shallow water. And I mean, I sort of gotten used to that little flooding icon that always appears, and in the cinematics and stuff they don't show up anyway, so it doesn't really bother me much. But one thing that does bother me a little bit, that I sort of had to try to hide, is when I plop these ships, some of them seem to displace the water underneath them, so you just have like bare ground. But the way that I sort of got rid of that, or masked it a little bit, was just to plop down some pavement underneath the ship, so to create a nice gray color, and you wouldn't see underneath the ship that much. So essentially now what I'm going to do is to start to build a little bit of the more militarized area of the naval base. So here we have a couple of helipads. There'll be a couple of hangars around this area which will house some missiles and weapons and tanks and all that sort of stuff. So I guess this is the sort of area within the naval base that's a little bit less Navy related, I guess. So on the workshop there was actually a surprising amount of different helicopters that you could get, from Coast Guard to tour helicopters. So I found a couple of military looking helicopters that I was able to plop down here, and I mean, they look really nicely detailed. So I end up plopping them down in a couple of spots, including on a couple of ships here. So it just adds a little bit of detail to the area. And like I said, I'm going to detail this area quite a bit. I'm going to add like some stashes and boxes and all sorts of filler props, if you will, because there's not a whole lot of military related stuff on the workshop, and I didn't want to overload my asset list as well, because it's not particularly a huge focus when I play City Skylines. You don't really play the game for military stuff anyway, so I don't want to overload my game with that. Now guys, with a good portion of the port developed, I just want to get into building the entrance for the port. So with this being a sort of restricted area, it's a militarized area, obviously not everybody is going to have access to this place. I decided to build this little toll section right here using the I'm not really sure at what point these were introduced into the game, but these toll booths here, they're just vanilla assets. They actually look pretty decent for what they are. So I decided to plop these down here and remove the main, or one of the main entrances into the port. So rather than having two entrances, we'll just have this main one right here. So yeah, the only issue that I had with this toll booth is using the prop changer. I wasn't able to change the trees that were around the toll booth, so I just end up plopping some third-party trees over the vanilla trees, so it does a pretty good job. So essentially with that being plopped down, I'm able to start developing this area, which will be just, general warehouses and your run-of-the-mill stuff. There'll also be a couple of offices and administrative buildings around, and obviously some barracks for people to sleep in. So this will all be in this sort of area right here. Now with the end of the video approaching, I just want to take a second to remind you guys that in the last episode, I told you I was going to make a poll in this episode on what's going to happen in the next episode. So essentially, I want to give you guys a say on how the city is going to develop, and this is also just a way of incorporating you guys a little bit more into the series and involving you a little more. So the first thing I want to do is give you guys the choice as to what's happening in the next episode. So you'll have three choices. Your first choice, as I mentioned in the last episode, will be the University of Timbukton. So really close to downtown, there is a huge chunk of empty land ready to be developed into the university. So that is your first choice. We'll also get to developing the area around the university eventually, so like housing and dorms and businesses that rely on the university. So that's the first choice. The second choice is developing the area around the military base right here, or the naval base. So obviously a lot of these military personnel are going to need places to stay. So I want to plop down a lot of residential, some apartments, some barracks around the base that will be, sort of in the middle of the Timbukton Peninsula here. So north of downtown is where this area would be. So like I mentioned a little earlier in the episode, we still need to develop the area around the port, so just to fill in those empty spots, and this is how I would like to do it. Now your third and final choice would be to finish Burton. Now we've sort of neglected Burton for the last 10 or so episodes, I think. So we have this huge residential section on top of this nice hill here that has yet to be developed. So I know some of you may want to finish Burton so we can officially close it off. There is still a lot of areas around Burton to develop, so we probably still have a few episodes worth of content. But one of the things that I've been sort of itching to get done in the back of my mind is the residential section in Burton. So if you guys want to see that being developed in the next episode before moving on to other things, you will have that choice. I know it's not like a big decision that you guys have to take, it's pretty simple, and all of those areas will eventually be developed anyways, but I think it's just a fun way to, start getting you guys interactive with how the series develops. So there will be more polls like this coming up, and I can't wait to think of ideas, and I can't wait to think of better ideas and stuff So I'm excited to see what you guys choose for the next episode, and I'm equally as anxious to get started on all 3 sections, so it completely doesn't matter to me where the series goes. But I think it's just a fun idea because it diversifies the progression of the city a little bit. I like to give you guys a say on how the city is built to keep you guys engaged. So as for what's going on in game right now, I am finalizing the details on the military port. So obviously adding a whole bunch of dirt and grime and stuff. With there being movement and trucks and stuff going everywhere, you're bound to get some pretty messy grounds, I guess. Based on the images that I've found on Google Maps and stuff, ports aren't exactly the cleanest areas on Earth. So I just try to add some grime and stuff everywhere. So with the end of this episode approaching, guys, I just want to thank you guys so much for watching, first of all, and I really hope that you enjoyed this 3-part series in the development of the port. It was a pretty huge undertaking. We had 3 full episodes of content just in the port alone, so it was a super fun and huge project for me, and I hope to get involved with some similar big projects in the future. So with all the additional factories and stuff that are available in-game now, I think we'll have some pretty big projects in store for the future. Also, guys, be sure to stay till the end of this episode, as we have some pretty cool cinematics coming up of what we've built so far. And, with all that being said and done, I can't wait to see how the city will develop in the future. So as for what's left to do here, I'm just going to plop down some final little details, some little lights and stuff, and minor things that are just sort of afterthoughts. You don't really think of them as you're plopping away. So with all that being said, guys, I really hope that you enjoyed this episode, and if you did, please be sure to give this video a thumbs up. Also, be sure to subscribe to the channel for much more content that is on the way. And also, guys, on a side note, if you were interested on taking my video production course, it is now available on Skillshare. So before it was only available on Udemy, and I have reproduced the course on Skillshare. So if you guys are subscribed to that, go check out my course. I'll put a link down in the description. So that is it for this episode, guys, and until the next episode, please take care.